Well, I think the other thing that Max Weber was getting at was also the loss of religion, and you can look at that in a couple of ways. I mean, maybe we have gotten rid of a lot of sort of the religious superstitions that clearly were wrong, and yet on the other hand, if you remove that sort of that spiritual life that was so dominant in people's mental space, have we lost something there? I mean, has the world become disenchanted because we rely so much on rationality?
I think it can be helpful here to distinguish a bit between religion and spirituality, and they do overlap. They're not completely distinct. When we talk about a religious practice, we're talking about belief and or behavior that follows the tenets of a particular religious tradition. And there is a wonder component to that. I think that religions generally draw our attention to the less explainable, the less easily accommodated aspects of life, birth and death and being and meaning, and how we are connected to the universe as a whole. Though that's sort of the domain that religion fills. To the extent that we walk away from religion as a way of understanding, in some ways we're walking away from those questions, and we've definitely done that, at least in the United States. I think it's helpful to define spirituality differently, and at least within psychology, it is defined differently. So spirituality is often defined as the perception or even the sensation that you as an individual are very small, but that you are connected to an interdependent, much larger whole, whether that's humanity or the living earth or the universe. That is really what spirituality is about, and that comes awfully close to how we describe the sense of awe. In fact, it overlaps quite strongly with things people say about what it feels to be in awe.
I mean, that's a fascinating question, whether the experience, the awe-inspiring experience of being in a magnificent cathedral or mosque is basically the same thing as looking up at the sky and being overwhelmed by all the stars. Is that basically one and the same?
Well, when I ask people to describe a time when they felt awe, and just put it like that, they describe both of those experiences.
Caspar?
Well, I mean, among the things that great religious traditions do is they provide community and structure and meaning for people's lives. And that's, clearly not to be underestimated. And the question of why people are disenchanted, coming from the UK where I live, this seems like a much more religious country than my country, but we still have, it seems, many similar problems. Currently, the rejection of expertise, for example, the populism, which in my view I find very concerning. There are many questions we perhaps need to explore to understand what it is that's going on there. Why is it that people are not getting a sense of, even if they are getting a sense of meaning and purpose from their religious tradition, that the society in which they live is so troubled? I don't know if I have an answer, but I think it is one of the things great religious traditions can do is provide community, also expand your sense of what your place is in relation to the divine, or however it's described. And there's great potential within all the traditions I'm aware of to welcome knowledge, and Islam welcomed knowledge in its golden age. Christianity arguably did the same. Other traditions have done that. Buddhists certainly do, and many others. Judaism, is a religion of the book of knowledge, and you could look at almost any tradition, I think, and see elements which are very fertile for let's call it progress. And I would hope that those working and struggling and fighting within those traditions will find the strength to bring it to their communities. Steve, you and I were talking briefly earlier today about people in the evangelical Christian community in the United States who are also concerned about climate change. And that doesn't sound like a Venn diagram. Usually those two overlap, but they do overlap for at least these few people. And whether or not they believe the Earth is 6,000 years old, they do nevertheless have a sense of responsibility, and they understand the scale and the scope of the challenge presented by climate change, and they accept the science, and they want to do something. But they will express it very forcefully and energetically within their religious frame and bring it to others.
Yeah, and there's there's no fundamental incompatibility between religion and science, and there are some, scientists who are deeply religious. Going back to Newton, his religion was a bit of a strange one compared to his contemporaries, but he was a deeply religious man, and yet he supposedly saw this apple fall from a tree, and he wondered about it, and then he looked up at the moon, and he wondered whether the reason that the moon doesn't go flying away from Earth is somehow related to the falling of the apple. And indeed, through his laws of motion and the law of universal gravitation, which he came up with, he found that indeed the orbit of the moon could be understood as the moon falling toward Earth at all times, but also having a tangential motion. So it falls and it continues to miss. But in this way, about wondering about the apple and of the moon, he drew a connection between terrestrial phenomena and celestial phenomena. And previously, the celestial phenomena were exclusively the domain of the gods and of religion and all that, right? So here he actually brought the two together.